What is up, Ravens Flock? Huge shout out for your support for the 410 Sports Talk. James and Glenn are the best in the business. Make sure you go subscribe to their channel. Let's go Ravens. Big trust.
Welcome in everyone to another episode of 410 Sports Talk. I'm Glenn Martin here with my co-host James Haskell. He is on the road right now, but we are going to not let that slow us down, not let this stop us from talking Ravens football, and we're excited to do so again for this one. Now, this episode, I'm going to set it up for me and Jimbo here because I'm going to save Jimbo's expertise for the meat of this. But so let me set the stage for what we're talking about. I've heard countless comments from the offensive coaching staff as well as the offensive players, and they're talking about this renewed commitment, this emphasis. Everybody used the same word, emphasis. So it's clearly something that everyone's been talking about consistently throughout this portion of the offseason in preparation for the upcoming season. And that emphasis is on the deep passing game. Now, this isn't the first time we've heard this, but it's clearly a renewed emphasis, Jimbo, and it's a direction that I think could do wonders for the offense. So we're going to get into what it could mean for the offense, but we're going to get into how can you – I mean, it's easy just to say we're going to hit more deep balls, but how do you make it a reality in practice, in preparation, and then make that happen on Sundays when you're lined up against the opposing defense? Because, Jimbo, isn't every team hopeful to hit deep balls?
Yeah, that's the funny thing about it. But I want to get into why I think it means so much more for the Ravens within the scheme of their offense if they can get this right. So, as we dig into this conversation, the thing I want to think about is, you think of how methodical we are in the rushing attack, right? We 4 yards, 6 yards, 7 yards, 4 yards, 2 yards, 8 yards, whatever. Like we pop off these long drives. Now, this is considering health, our full backfield, Lamar at its best, right? You think of 19, even 20, that run game was methodical, would grind you out and things like that. But I think the combination of that and so what I see in my mind is Greg Roman's ability to be deceptive in the run game, but now turning the same format, you take the same setup and Lamar comes to the line and, you lull the defense to sleep, and then what you're able to do is strike quickly, right? And it means to me so much more for the Ravens because similar to having a great defense, if the Ravens can do that once a game and get a lead, the other team is already in big trouble because when we play with a lead, it's just a difficult situation. So I think that getting this right is so important for the Ravens and means so much more for them than any other team, especially pass heavy teams. For example, the Cardinals, who just sling it all over the field, but that's equivalent to me to our run game, right? Like their elite level, ability to push down the field and do so often. Our run game is the same within our offense as it is in there. So this is crucial. I'm so glad they're talking about it, and I think it will have a profound impact. But Glenn, my question to you is, like you said, how do they get it done?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that they asked the coaches. They asked T. Martin, who is, of course, in charge of the wide receiver group and developing them. But I'm sure his input on the offense extends beyond just him one-on-one coaching the individuals in the wide receiver room. I'm sure his influence is certainly felt in the scheme of the offense as well as the game day game plan every week when they're taking on an opponent. So they asked T. Martin about that exact question. They asked James Urban, of course, the quarterback coach, similar questions, and they asked the players themselves about that. But T. Martin in particular, he talked about the difference in practice preparation, and he kind of opened up a little bit, which was nice to hear because a lot of times coaches like to keep things pretty close to the vest. But he talked about in years past, last year in particular, they didn't do a ton of deep routes in practice because they wanted to save the legs of their wide receivers for game day. I mean, this is a quick turnaround in the National Football League. You're playing on a Sunday. You got a few days for your body to heal, and then you got to be up and ready to go the following Sunday. And you got to do that over a very long season. And so they didn't do a ton of deep route practicing because that's just taxing on your legs. And you don't want to show up to a game day Sunday with a bunch of receivers and their legs are gassed out and tired from. So what their thought process was, they practiced heavily on the short and intermediate, and they sprinkled in deep passing game. Well, through some self-scouting through the offseason, they said, you know what, that's just not good enough. It's not good enough. It's not a big enough emphasis to make sure that this stuff happens on game day. And we're not just missing, because I mean, Jimbo, you remember how many times did they just miss the deep ball? You know, how many times was that ball just over the outstretched arms or just to the out of bounds? And if you miss it by just this much, that's all it takes. It's an incomplete pass. Now you're behind the change. It's 2nd and 10 instead of, whatever it could have been. And now if you don't have a successful second down play, you're in 3rd and long. And then before you know it, you're punting. So every little step counts. So they talked about, they're making that renewed emphasis. They're practicing the deep route way more often than they had been. They're not just practicing in team drills. They're practicing deep routes on one-on-ones. They're doing it on 7-on-7. They're doing it, of course, on 11-on-11, but they're doing it consistently throughout, and it's that emphasis. They keep talking about it. They highlight good plays in the film room. They celebrate. It's just like they say, everybody likes being praised, so let's praise it. Let's praise a deep ball. Let's bring it up. Let's make sure we mention it. Excuse me. So that's just one coach's. And then when they talked about Brent Urban, I appreciate you letting me kind of filibuster here, Jimbo, because
no, you're good.
I got my notes out here, I old school, handwritten, just so y'all know, this ain't no digital stuff.
I'm going to have to call you Skip Bayless.
Oh, don't call me that, because that dude's been saying some pretty suspect stuff lately.
Oh, has he? I just meant the notes.
Okay. I'll take the notes, but
I'm not sure what he's been saying, but the notes,
man.
certainly.
Look up his Steph Curry comments not long ago. They were pretty shocking to hear. But anyway, we're not here to talk about crazy Skip Bayless. But Brent Urban said the same thing when he was talking about Lamar Jackson. It was funny. He said, look, I'm going to be able to tell when you get here. As soon as I see you, I'll be able to tell if you've been doing work. And he said as soon as he saw him, he could tell in all the best ways possible. And what that means, he said, no, he didn't change this. He didn't change that. He improved this and he improved that. So it wasn't a complete overhaul, but those little nuanced changes in his technique and his commitment, it makes all the difference between a completed pass or an incomplete pass. And so I love to hear the coaches talk about the renewed emphasis in practice and individual drills and team drills everywhere, because like you said, Jimbo, a team that likes to pound the ball, it's invaluable to sprinkle in those chunk plays, because you can't have a 15-play drive every single drive.
Right, because what it does is it creates more opportunities for mistakes. And now you can have 1 or 2 of those drives, maybe 3 or 4 if you're really, really lucky in a game, but depending on that is an issue, right? Being fully dependent on that is the problem. But there's a few things that, a point that I just want to add to is how they make that happen, and emphasis, and them talking about wanting to be better at it in practice and things like that. And one of the things that I'm learning that I think is really important, I think is what you're getting at, is the difference between false bravado and confidence is simply proof that in your own mind that you've done it before, that you can do it, right? So the only way they get proof is by repping it out in practice. That's all you can do, right? Yep. Now, the real question will be, I think a lot of fans is, well, the conundrum that they will face is they'll hear what the coach is saying, but they also just offloaded their best deep threat, right, in Marquise Brown. So now what does that look like, right? I think Rashad Bateman gets it done. And to answer that question, for those of you that are worried, I would keep your eyes on 2 people, and this is just wide receivers. I'm not talking about Mark Andrews, and we'll get to the tight ends, I'm sure, as a part of this. But I would keep your eyes on 2 people. One, obviously, Rashad Bateman, but the other one is Tylan Wallace. We mentioned this before, but the Ravens dug deep into the analytics when they drafted these 2 guys. And while they're not the prototypical 6'4", 2 and a quarter, they were both in the top 10 in contested catches throughout their college time. And so that is crucial, especially when you're talking about a deep pass, because a lot of times it's not going to be like the guy's 4 steps ahead of the other guy. Lamar's got to drop it in the bucket, and somebody's got to go up and get it, right? So I think that those 2 things are important. Look out for those 2 guys when it comes to that part of the offense. But as well as getting it done, I mean, we've talked about Mark Andrews. The other name I think that's sneaky that is making a name for himself right now is Isaiah Likely. Isaiah Likely's speed up the seam and potentially on the outside could be another way that the Ravens utilize the weapon they have, and added deception because he can line up as a tight end to develop this deep passing game. But let me ask you this, Glenn, and feel free to comment on that as well. But the other question I have is, are there any concerns around this workload, essentially, right? This increased workload in practice and the correlation of that potentially, increasing injury?
Right.
Because
yeah.
we went through injuries so bad last year that I know we want to avoid that like the plague, right?
No doubt. And the worry when you're doing a lot of these deep routes and you're practicing a lot of stuff is the soft tissue stuff, because you're not doing a ton of change of direction when you're running a deep route, but you will put some stress on your hammies, and you got to make sure that if when you show up for practice, certainly when training camp starts, these guys got to make sure that they're not using training camp as a way to get into shape, that they're in shape as soon as they get here, because you're 100% right. If coach is making this emphasis, they know that this emphasis exists, and they know that they have to be expected to practice these deep routes and to make sure that their legs are in good enough shape. These are all very young men. This is maybe, if it's not the youngest receiving core in the league, it's got to be right up there at the very top. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find a younger group. And so because of that, I'm confident that, look, these guys, if they take care of their bodies, can certainly handle the workload. And it's like you always say, Jimbo, people raise to the level of expectation. And if the expectation is, look, we're going to run a little bit more because we need to practice this stuff to make sure we're ready when the season comes around, then they have to get it done. I mean, this is their profession. They're all in their young 20s. And there's no reason why, with this, renewed emphasis, that they can't make this a reality. But you mentioned the tight ends, and you're 100% right. They are going to look to dominate the middle of the field with that group. But when they do throw it, because they always say, well, Lamar struggles throwing the outside. That's what the detractors will say. They'll say they don't do enough throwing outside the numbers, da-da-da-da. Look, every team has an emphasis. Every team has a strength. Every team has a game plan. And so while, like you mentioned, the Cardinals may have a more complex passing scheme. Sure, they may have a more diverse route tree that they use in their play art and all that stuff, and that's fine. But their run game is extremely limited, and that shows up in other areas. And while the Ravens are the opposite. So what they say is, let's not try and be a cheap knockoff of all these passing teams and try and imitate what they do best. Let's do what we do best. And instead of, you might not see a bunch of deep outs from the Ravens, but you will see play action, deep ball throws to the outside, down the field. And as long as you complete one or two of those a game, that's all you need to get the respect of the defense. And that opens up the middle of the field where it's their bread and butter. It's Lamar's bread and butter. It's this tight end group's bread and butter. And it opens up the box for the run game, which of course is Ray Groman's, that's what he does. So it's so much more than just the quick threat, the big play, because we all know, we saw it last year. If the Ravens, struggled on first down, if they had a negative 2 yard and first down, boom, they're in big trouble, Jimbo. 2nd and 12 is not a place the Baltimore Ravens fared well fighting out of. But if you have a deep ball that scares the defense, then they can't load 8-9 in the box. They can't stop you and hopefully push you for a negative on first down and force you into long second down and long third down. They can't do it because they know that there's a very good chance you're going to throw the ball right over their head off of play action, and they have to respect the run, so they can't just sell out and run their safeties deep. So it's everything complements one another. If this passing game deep starts working, the run game will benefit, the intermediate passing game will benefit, and of course, Lamar Jackson will be even more of a headache as a scrambler than he was before.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm really excited about this. I hope they make it happen. And like you said, I count on the tight ends being an integral part of the progression of the deep pass. And let's also not forget, oh my gosh, can you see this? Sorry. That is the biggest bull I've ever, do you see that thing? Okay. Sorry. Sidebar. That was a massive bull. But I just wanted to say that Lamar Jackson, before he got injured, I think it was the first 6 weeks of the season, he was leading the league in yards per attempt, if I'm not mistaken.
Like 14 or something yards. Yep.
And then he was also leading in yards per attempt and yards per per completion at a certain point, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe you're right.
If not, he was right up there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so he certainly wants to push the ball down the field, has all the confidence in himself, and so do we. Like, it doesn't make me nervous. Like you said, the detractors will say that, you know, Lamar can't do this, Lamar can't do that. And I think it's just a lazy take at this point. I'm excited for them to do it and to
Marquise was the fast guy, but let's not forget that Devin Duvernay ran a sub 4.4. Rashad Bateman ran a sub 4.4. Tyler Wallace ran a sub 4.4. They got speed on this roster, so let's not act like just because Hollywood's gone, they got nobody that can take the top off the defense.
Right, 100%. And then on top of that, what Marquise had in speed, and this is no knock. I told you this year, guys, I'm trying to be nice to players. However, the reality is the reality, so don't at me. But what he lacked in what he had in speed, there were certain, moments where Marquise is not winning a 50-50 ball in a lot of scenarios. And not just because he was small. Look at his cousin, much bigger than him, but certainly doesn't seem to be his forte or desire as a player to go up and, you know, and do what some of these other guys do. Even if Steve Smith, who was small, you could depend on to win a 50-50 ball. Just not something Marquise thrived in or prospered in necessarily. And so I think that's an important part of this offense that this wide receiver core that we're going to see improvement on when the from a wide receiver perspective that was top 10 in his college career in contested passes. And that's a huge difference than a Marquise Brown. Huge. I think we'll definitely see that, and it'll increase Lamar's faith in just letting the ball fly. Like, we used to joke last year about Ben Roethlisberger, and he'd say, hey, guys, like, just run a go route, and I'm going to throw you the ball. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, but there's got to be a little bit more of that from the Baltimore Ravens, right? Like, you can't be 8 yards open all the time. You got to depend on you guys to get the job done, and they've got to show Lamar that they can. So, dude, I'm looking forward to it. This could be the piece. Who's the guy, Thanos, with the things on his hands? I'm not a Marvel guy, but I know the last one, it takes over the whole universe and 1/3 of the, population dies or whatever. Could be one of those scenarios where our offense just becomes so ridiculously unstoppable. It's just an absolute cheat code, right?
Yeah, well, if they can get back to a semblance of their 2019 offense, then it was pretty close to a cheat code that year. If they just didn't have some little bit of too much rust heading into the playoffs that year, who knows what could have happened. But yeah, absolutely. They got the talent. They seem to have the renewed emphasis, and let's just pray for some good health and kind of see what happens. But let us know what you guys think. Have you been listening? Have you heard this renewed emphasis on the deep passing game? How do they make that happen? And when they do, if they do, what does that mean for, kind of the ceiling of this team and where it could take them? Because we know the running game is going to be there. Look, Gus and JK, they're back. And this run attack is of course led by Lamar Jackson, and it's going to be, no doubt about it, top 3. And honestly, let's be honest, it's going to be number 1.
Yeah, especially with the there's no way the O-line isn't intact. Like, Eric and John will make sure of that. But this is the other thing I want to say really quickly then. If you're skeptical of this, put in the comments, is it any way, for all you skeptics out there, is this a way for Greg Roman? Is he pushing this narrative and this idea to help lengthen his career as a Baltimore Ravens offensive coordinator, right? Like, he's saying, this is my emphasis, this is my goal. So that way, if it ends up not working out, he's like, hey, look, this was my emphasis. You saw me working on it, right? Like, is there any way that he's trying to, because he's been 3 and out his last 2 jobs? Yeah. Something like that. So is this any way for him to make it past that 3 years?
Well, one thing you don't want to do is stress an emphasis and come up short, because that's not a good reflection on you as a coach. If that's your emphasis and you don't make it happen, but you're right. Fans should be encouraged because of that, because that's what fans have been saying we're missing is a more a downfield threat in the passing game. And so if the coaches are identifying it as an issue, they're saying it's an emphasis, then all we can do, at least right now, is expect that to make a big, huge jump in the right direction. So I'm excited. I'm encouraged by that renewed emphasis, and I can't wait to see it on the field. Even in the preseason, I'll be excited to see it. Let's see what they got. But let us know what you guys think in the comments below, and we'll talk soon.